Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor. Today we're talking about psychedelics.
So before we get into this episode, we just want to make clear that we're not advocating or encouraging the use of any illicit substances. Any of these psychedelic compounds should be approached with great care and a concern for safety at all times.
So,
So,
um, shall we jump right in?
yeah, sure.
How are we gonna start this one?
Uh,
This is a pretty big topic for me.
yeah.
I would say that psychedelics are probably the number one thing that has influenced me in my adult life.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe I'd say something similar. Like, it's hard to it's hard to think of one like singular thing that I can say has like quote unquote influenced me,
You're right.
like whatever that means. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, I mean, well, it kind of changes everything.
It does. Um, yeah, and like there's so many things about life that is just constant in flux, and you're always changing and growing and learning things. But something about the psychedelic experience being so immediate and unquestionable and drastic, it's like a complete flipping everything on its head in such a short time span that it really forces you to embrace a serious change.
Hmm. If your mind is in the right state to begin with, because
That's
a
true.
lot of people can take it and not really. Uh, if your mindset isn't a certain way when you start out, it's easy to miss
That's absolutely true.
kind of like really uh, all like kind of philosophical, like life altering stuff.
Yeah. One thing I will never understand is how people can use a psychedelic as a party drug.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the same kind of people who aren't like really interested in that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
It's just, I guess, a very different mindset from me, and I've seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen people have really even positive experiences with the psychedelics, and then they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I'm thinking about doing it next week too. That was a lot of fun." Fun. I would never use the word fun to describe my experiences with psychedelics.
yeah. I mean, how big of a dose were they taking?
Um, the time I was just thinking about was not a huge dose. It was truffles, which are pretty lightweight.
So mushrooms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about dosage. So have you had the experience that some of the more valuable experiences have been when you took less?
Uh, yeah, I guess so. I mean, the most I've ever taken, at least like considering like tolerance, because I've taken two tabs two times.
Mm-hmm.
But the second time my tolerance was kind of up, so it was uh, less less strong of an experience. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
first time was the one that just kind of like hit me a train that I wasn't expecting, and
Yeah.
was kind of half like one quarter good trip, one three quarters what most people would probably call a bad
Yeah.
trip, like half of what people would call a bad trip. Um, Uh, but yeah, I'd say probably like the most. Uh, um, yeah, the second time I did it when I only took one tab, uh, I probably had the most like positive realizations about just existence and life and perception, that kind of thing.
Yeah, me too. I feel like when I've taken larger doses, the experience has. People talk about like pushing through, like people who do lots of psychedelics. Oh, this time I'm going to do 5 tabs. I feel like I'm really pushing through to something, some greater understanding. But to me, the more intense that experience is, the more that is, the more of the substance you take. The Yeah, it does floor you. Yeah, it does push the truth of the revelation harder onto you, but at the same time, the things it kind of points to and can teach you are so subtle things that to me it feels like it's more effective to take a small dose and to listen and see what you can learn from that experience rather than to try to take a lot and have it force you to learn.
Yeah, I mean, the people who take large doses, I don't think they're trying to force anything. It's more of like an exploration
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a wide variety of people using it in different ways, but I've definitely heard language of trying to push through, trying to reach some hitherto untouched height,
Hmm.
which I don't know if that works for my approach.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're kind of assuming that it's the same epiphanies and the same realizations, just with more force, rather than just completely a completely different set of realizations and stuff that you would get
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
from the higher
I am.
doses.
I am making that assumption.
Although, yeah, I mean, there's the whole Alan Watts thing about once you get the message, hang up the phone.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, like, I mean, then there are like people, there are people like Ram Dass who have done psychedelics like 200 something times, and and seem to have the if not the opposite, very different conception of it.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose it boils down to different people's physiology and the way that they can interact with these substances.
Hmm.
Some people are much more susceptible to some of the side effects.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it makes me think of what Terrence McKenna said about when he and his brother started experimenting with mushrooms, that they were looking for maps of the mind,
Hmm.
and that the mushroom was a tool to help construct those maps. And that does kind of remind me of a labyrinth where there's always something more to be explored, and there's always different avenues to more fully reveal.
Yeah, sure, I can buy that. So, Trevor, what would you say is the biggest takeaway or revelation that you got from psychedelics?
Uh, well, I remember the second time I ever did acid, which was with yours truly, as my trip sitter, which was great.
Oh,
Um,
mine truly, yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yours truly, yeah. Uh-huh.
right, yeah,
Your,
no.
me, yours truly, yeah. I
Let me
gotcha.
back up. uh, that up.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say probably the second time that I ever did acid, which is only the second time I ever did psychedelics, where Eric was trip sitting me, and
Hmm.
we were out at Chautauqua Park in Boulder, Colorado, and beautiful day. Probably couldn't have asked for a better day.
Hmm.
besides that there was a thunderstorm later. But
Which was awesome.
yeah. um, but I remember that I had been kind of reading about free will and the illusion of free will a lot and thinking about that. And we were sitting on this hill looking across at these clouds, and they were moving in like these time steps, these very distinct, like there's an image, there's another image that's slightly different, there's another image that's slightly different, um, kind of superimposed on one another, and one kind of fades in as the other fades out. I guess kind of classic tracer stuff, but it was happening in slow motion with the clouds, and everything was kind of swirly, and it just reminded me of Gears, and that everything was just kind of clockwork. And uh, and the phrase I kind of had in my head was that the universe is working itself out, just like if you're kind of working out some kind of logic problem, or if you're in music, if you're like working out counterpoint, that it's all kind of the universe is just unfolding in this very clockwork way that's profoundly beautiful.
Wow.
and tied up in that was the idea that like each time step that I was seeing the cloud move in was like one packet of perception, like that was the present moment.
Yeah.
And that's something you can feel. And I actually so that was in that was in 2017. After that I moved back in with my dad for a little bit. I remember there was this book he had, who I have no idea who it was by or what the title was. But I was just kind of flipping through it one day, and the author was talking about what people consider to be the present moment, kind of on average. And it's about what I was witnessing. It's like, I don't know, between 1.5 and 2.5 seconds or something. And my kind of theory about that is that it has something to do with the heartbeat, that when the blood kind of pulses in your brain, that creates some perception of like now.
Interesting. Wow.
Now.
I remember we talked about this in our time episode, and you were talking about seeing time as discrete packets then. Mm-hmm. Would you say the birth of that philosophy in your mind could be traced back to this instant with acid?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I don't remember thinking about it before that.
Wow.
Yeah, same actually with the same idea we talked about of existence being a eternal continuous loop, that we're all living our lives in a loop. I don't specifically remember if that happened during an acid trip, but I remember it was pretty close after one that I had this year, where I started thinking about that a lot. So I don't that might have had something to do with that too. But the nature of time has always been a theme.
Cool.
How about you?
How about me? What was the biggest
thing?
Yeah. So I'd say the most profound thing was made painfully clear to me in the first experience I ever had with psychedelics, which was the beginning of the sophomore year of college, where I took 1 tab of acid with a group of friends. So I had been toying with this idea before I took the acid about how all of existence is rooted in perception. That we've already talked about that a bit. How I see, therefore I am. The conceptual landscape is represented by the physical landscape, but the perceptual is sacrosanct. It's necessary in order to have existence. Mm-hmm. And so then when I took the psychedelics, it had the effect of forcing me to recognize my present moment, that I exist in this present moment, and with that, the most profound sense of significance of my own existence. That to exist is meaningful. Now, I exist, therefore my existence has value, because I could not exist. There's that possibility, but I do. And so the fact that over the course of time, there's a series of choosing to exist, even if it's a random choice, even if it's a flip of the coin. But if there's a few of those that line up, then it sort of entrenches itself into a pattern of sort of retroactively imbuing the existence with value. Does that make any sense?
Say that last part one more time.
It has the effect of retroactively imbuing the existence with value.
What does?
Let me back up. So, let me paint the picture a little bit. So, we take the acid, kind of hanging around. We're in a cabin up in the mountains in Colorado. We go out for a walk after about an hour. And so far, I'm, what is this? I'm not seeing anything. I'm not even feeling anything. Maybe my thoughts are a little bit strange, having some interesting. I remember looking at the ice that was packed onto the cement of the ground where the snow had been trodden down, and just seeing this little sheet of ice over the cement and thinking, that right there, that ice is like my social interactions with people. And I didn't understand what that meant. I came to an understanding of that much, much later on. Maybe a year or two afterward, I finally understood what that had meant. But we walk around, still seeing nothing, feeling nothing. We go back, and that's all I remember chronologically, because then I remember sitting on the couch. I'm on my own, sitting on the couch, and looking forward, no longer in the physical space, really. I was looking into this space where all I was seeing was, at first, one spark, like one star in the middle of nothingness. Mm-hmm. And that was a point of perception. That was a little spot of existence saying, I am. Mm-hmm. And then there was another instant in time. And by the way, that one spark was not existing over the course of time. That was a present moment, right? Kind of like your instances with the clouds. One discrete package. That was for eternity. That thing existed. And then there was another eternity, and it existed again, and another. And then there were several of them, and they were all linking together to form this like constellation. And then that kind of snowballed into this colony and outward until there was like what I swear I was seeing was like my own neural networks. See the synapses connecting in my mind. But each point, rather than being like a cell, it was like this abstract notion of existence. And from that, it's like my entire reality knitted itself back together around that concept of existence, and that each moment, each of those points could choose to exist or not to exist, and I would see it happen. I'd see some of them fade out and some of them stay on, and the ones that stayed on were more likely to continue staying on, because um, it was like, oh, they're staying on because there's a reason to stay on, even though it was random chance at first that lined them up like that.
And that ties back to what you were saying about you could not exist, but you are existing there.
And so that has to have meaning, that has to have value.
Yeah.
And for me, that was just the most gut-wrenching, violent realization. It was like the acid was showing me, oh, you were thinking about, oh, maybe you exist and maybe your existence has value. Oh, well, let me show you. It's true. This is real.
Yeah.
These little thoughts you're toying with, this is real. This is your life right now, and it's slipping away, and you have the choice to engage with it or not. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to trace because I don't remember thinking a whole lot about consciousness. Um, I don't know, like not even after the first time, like the first few times I did it. I don't think I really started thinking about like the nature of consciousness until probably like after we graduated. But uh, yeah, I mean, a lot of people will say it's like an accident of biology or it's like an emergent property that isn't really doing anything. But I think it is like one of the most profound things about the universe, and
Yeah,
that gives it significance, and that gives our lives and our perception significance.
definitely. If you like, I'd like to read a short excerpt from my acid account of
Sure.
that first time. So the day after I took acid, I went home early because I needed to recoup and be on my own, and I wrote an account of my experience. And this is a little section from that, of what I was just talking about. Sitting on the couch, my entire existence becomes the singular point of perceiving, being in this moment. There is no further knowledge of the passage of time, and the details in my vision are reduced to the singular perception that I am here right now. This idea, this perception, is very completely and very definitely real. This is a fundamental truth. I perceive, therefore I exist. It is entirely distinct from the physical world, as it is simply a thought, but it exists as a thought. The fundamental truth of my existence persists unwaveringly throughout the entire night and the next day as I write this. It has not gone away. By its very nature, its desire to exist, I do not expect that it will ever leave, though it may become partially obscured by the slow return of my normal cycles of thought.
Wow. So do you consider the statement "I perceive, therefore I exist"? Is that's what you said?
Yeah.
Do you consider that different from the Descartesian "I think, therefore I am"?
It's definitely an offshoot of the same
Mm-hmm.
idea. Um, I think we can say that there are some problems with "I think, therefore I am." I mean,
Yeah.
especially with our understanding of thought as it relates to developing of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and just kind of language in general. You can perceive without thinking,
Yeah.
I think. Um, yeah, I mean, I like perception is really the only thing. Like it is the fundamental thing that we can be sure of, and we
Mm.
can't be sure of much else other than that.
Yeah.
Like for sure.
Uh-huh.
um, and yeah, it is just kind of a miracle that we're perceiving anything at all.
It is.
Um,
Mm. Yeah, it's experiences like these that I've learned from psychedelics to appreciate spiritual experiences. I can understand what would lead someone to fall down on the ground in prayer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so maybe I can talk about the first time I
Yeah,
I took a
please.
psychedelic. So yeah, because it was definitely very much in that vein.
Mm.
And yeah, I guess just a little background on kind of my spiritual uh, on my spiritual journey, for the lack of a better word. It sounds like kind of cliche, but whatever.
Whatever.
Um, so uh, my mom is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, and so I grew up going to church every Sunday at a Methodist church, and it was in the youth group and stuff. And pretty much by middle school, I was on board with the whole thing, and then near the end of middle school, I was kind of getting more skeptical. My dad is he'd probably consider himself either agnostic or an atheist, although he slight tangent, I guess, but he was the music director for a while for this kind of new agey place called the Sierra Center for Positive Living that was like church but very very progressive and
Mm.
like sciency and all that stuff. But I kind of had his influence and my mom's influence uh, interacting. Um,
Mm.
Not that they were either of them were trying to actively influence me, but
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of there. And so yeah, by the end of middle school and going to high school, I basically started to become more skeptical of everything, and I was really into science. And uh, I read Cosmos by Carl Sagan at one point, and A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and uh, both of whom are very, I would say avowed atheists. Um, and I pretty much continued that all the way, through high school. I kept going to church and mostly, well, partly because it was the community, and partly because I wanted to be with my mom and my sister. And
Mm.
then I started playing music in church, which I feel like was definitely something already at that point that I felt to be a pretty spiritual connection with people. And then, yeah, and then it wasn't until my junior year of college that I took acid for the first time, and uh,
Mm-hmm.
um, basically, so the basic effect of which was that I became almost completely unsure of anything that I thought I knew, and started to question almost everything that I knew. Um, and the way I kind of described it to myself immediately after was that I felt like a newborn or something. I had to kind of reconstruct everything
Mm.
from scratch, and
Yeah.
yeah, it made me much less sure that there wasn't anything to religion or spirituality or anything like that, and that there are yeah, like who knows, as Terrence McKenna said, nobody knows jack shit about what is going on. It's still one of my favorite Terrence McKenna quotes of all time.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. um, and then so that was fall semester of my junior year, and then the semester after that, I went to study abroad in England, in Manchester, and uh, was able to travel in Europe for a little bit after that, and ended up going to a bunch of churches with very ornate stained glass windows and all this really ornate artwork, and um, it just struck me that like out of context just looks so much like what we consider psychedelic artwork,
Mm.
um, and just the intricacy of it, and uh, the idea that it's been kind of like recursively um, becoming more and more ornate over time. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, it struck me that there was this very real parallel there between
Definitely.
the spiritual religious experience and the psychedelic experience, which a lot of people would say gives us a real window into if not like the fundamental fabric of reality, at least the nature of our brain and our
Hmm.
existence.
Yeah. I remember when I was in Europe walking around and seeing those old buildings. I At night after every time I did that, I would have the most intense, real, closed eye visuals of these like undulating, fractal, three dimensional shapes,
Hmm.
which was so striking because normally when I close my eyes and go to sleep, I kind of don't really have any visuals at all.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how much of that is just kind of your or how much of that is your subconscious manipulating what's been put into your brain by your senses
Mm-hmm.
recently. Like you can see it
Yeah,
toying with it and turning it around in different ways.
yeah, and it's so amazing to me though that there's certain things like these arabesque shapes that you have on all these old buildings that seem to resonate so deeply with something inside that they stand out that way.
Yeah, yeah, just the idea of a spiral, or I remember I remember that second time where you were with me. I had a page in my notebook where uh, I wrote like the fundamental gesture, and it was all kind of these
Hmm.
little like swirly things, and
Uh
like that is like the fundamental like aesthetically satisfying gesture.
huh.
And like you learn the same thing in counterpoint, where you don't want the line just keep going up. You want it to kind of go up and then down and like curl back around on itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, the golden ratio and all that. And um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's definitely all interconnected.
Hmm. Sound like a hippie.
It's funny because you grow up and like hippies, I feel like you're exposed to the idea of a hippie like fairly early on.
Yeah.
and and it's like this caricature, and then yeah, I mean, at least for us, like you get to college and you're like, wait, is that me right now? Even though I'm not wearing all like the like the flowers and the crazy colors and the peace
Hmm.
medallions and
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. We don't get our kicks on LSD. We don't make a party out of living like the hippies out in San Francisco do.
It's all about that white lightning.
Oh yeah, biggest thriller. That wet. Yep, right there. Okay, now that we've finished alienating half of the country from our listening base,
We can just make this a super political episode.
so here's the thing about Donald Trump.
Karl Marx had some good ideas.
Oh boy. So back to drugs.
I'm curious how you think your experiences have influenced your relationship with art and experiencing art and creating art.
Hmm. Not in a direct way, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, definitely in an indirect way. Um, Something that I've gained from my series of experiences with psychedelics is uh, a sort of way of looking or seeing the world where I am aware of things in my field of vision and of space and just the presence of things. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No. I know what you mean. Like, uh, like yeah, like what are objects, kind of,
Yeah,
and the relationship between objects and that like everything, uh, is has like some aesthetic to it.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
uh Yeah, and then being able to look at a piece of work and lose myself, a piece of art, and whether that's looking at a painting or listening to music, just to lose myself in that and allow that experience to wash over me.
hmm Yeah, that's actually, I mean, the times I've had before I was listening to music on psychedelics, I feel like I was so kind of uh, wary or kind of just had a lot of thoughts buzzing around in my brain that I couldn't really get to a place like that. Um,
Hmm.
but the
Yeah, yeah, go.
but the uh, time before last when I I decided to drop acid and uh, underestimated the dose that I was taking.
Hmm.
For the time of day I was taking it, I got ambushed by this email from a from someone that I had to like respond to, and
Kids, turn off
it
your
just
phone
back and
before you
forth.
take acid.
Yeah, or well, yeah, make sure that you have tied up all your loose ends. Um, but in the in the middle of that, I was listening to part of Die Last on the Comatorium by the Mars Volta, and I had this moment of just complete concentration on the music and the feeling that that's all I was in that moment
Wow.
without the thoughts. It was I was just the experience of the music.
How was that for you?
I mean, it was pretty profound. I mean, I was immediately like, wow, I wonder how long this is going to go on, and then it's kind of you're kind of in and out of like being aware that that's your experience and actually having it.
Hmm.
But it was, yeah, I had I've had moments like that sober for sure where I was experiencing the music, and 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 focusing on it more or less completely and not didn't really have any other thoughts in my head, but
Mm-hmm.
it just seemed so much more intense.
Okay,
And
cool. I've
yeah,
never had that experience with art on psychedelics. That what I described of seeing. I think I learned how to see from the psychedelics, but I never actually had that sort of experience with art while I was on the psychedelics.
hmm yeah. I will say one of the hands down most uh, bizarre and convincing like hallucinatory episodes I've had was listening to a piece we discussed on our spectralism episode, uh, Les Espaces Acoustiques by Grisey. And somewhere in the middle of listening to that, I was convinced that what I was listening to was some kind of performance art piece with someone throwing up into a trash can, and that was like the sounds I was hearing.
Huh.
And I think that was uh, partially maybe me thinking about my first acid trip when that's what I was doing.
Right.
maybe, but yeah, I remember my friend Aiden and I were listening to that piece, just kind of taking breaks, doing it like 30-minute chunks or whatever. And I was like, "Is this still Grisey?" He was like, "Yep." Shit. Because I never listened to that piece all the way through. So there very could have, it's a piece of 20th century music, anything goes. There very could well have been like just something like I don't know. The image I have in my head is like some kind of Yoko Ono like performance art piece.
Uh-huh. Wow.
um, I think it was just like read multiphonics or some kind of like flutter tonguing thing. I don't know.
Mm.
Um, but something that came up at that same time was the idea of art being condensed experience, and that's part of what makes it so profound, is that someone, for whatever time they're creating the piece, like not just the time that they're sitting down actually creating it, but kind of their whole life up to that point, and especially the period during which they're creating it, gets condensed in whatever they create. And then when the person experiences the art, they get all of that kind of condensed down into the relatively short experience of experiencing the piece. And that's part of what makes it so profound.
Wow. That's a really interesting way to think about it. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, especially and it's especially for a piece like that, Lisa Spazio Acústico. I think Grisey took like 6 years to write it because it's just such a gigantic thing. Yeah, if you just think about 6 years of someone's life, it's yeah. The way I think about it is the opposite of that machine from The Princess Bride, where you run the machine and it like takes a year of your life away.
Right. Oh, cool.
The opposite of that.
Wow, by experiencing other people's life, you're extending your own life.
Yeah.
It's really cool. We're enriching it.
Yeah. I mean, and I would extend art to, reading things.
Yeah, definitely. We're so glad you found the time to listen to our podcast. We hope you're getting something out of it. If you are, there's a few simple ways you can help keep this going. We hear that subscribing on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you're listening on is a really tangible way to help get our name out there. You can also leave a great review and share us on social media. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the second half.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk about being with my girlfriend Maddie when she did acid for the first time.
Sure.
This past Saturday.
Oh,
so yeah, it was a good time. She just took half a tab because the stuff that I have is pretty potent. We were both glad she only took that much. Yeah, we started off by watching this performance of Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony on YouTube, which is like this almost 2-hour symphony. We watched just like the first 3 movements, and then and we're like, yeah, let's take a break. Yeah, I was a little worried because if you remember that time we did edibles, she got like a headache, and it kind of like like dominated the experience a little bit. And she started to get this like toothache, sinus-ache thing, and but it didn't really, like, it didn't turn into a bad trip for her.
Good.
Which was good.
So
yeah, she was. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask you what was interesting about this experience.
Well, it was the first time that I been with someone who was tripping while I wasn't, and so I just got to kind of see it through new eyes. And yeah, I'd thought about what it would be like doing that with her for a long time, and yeah, I'm glad she took to it. And she had she sent me kind of some of the things she wrote down. Um,
Cool.
yeah, but she was talking a lot about like witnessing thoughts turning into memories, and talking about how can you be sure that the present moment isn't just like a memory of the actual present moment. I could be getting that slightly wrong. I tried to like
Wow.
talk get like exactly what she meant, and I feel like I kept slightly misunderstanding it, but it was something like that.
That's
And then
that's fascinating.
yeah, and then she said it was stretching like taffy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there's kind of that experience often of like comparing it to sensorial experiences that seem completely random, like tying random physical experiences with these highfalutin conceptual ideas.
Hmm. But what do you mean by that?
Oh, like for example, the ice in my first experience, like
Hmm.
looking at that and just like that physical experience of ice on concrete and saying, "Oh yeah, clearly this is the same as my social interactions with people."
Yeah, yeah. So everything's a metaphor.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I mean that goes along with like your brain being able to make connections that it wouldn't have made before,
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah,
So
she was also talking about how her mental images were all in terms of connective tissue.
interesting. Do you know what
Yeah.
she meant by that?
Uh, I'm not sure exactly. I think it was something to do with like the visuals she was seeing on the ceiling. Just kind of, she described it as like lace, kind of like different layers of lace, like
Mm.
intersecting, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, fabric has been a potent metaphor that
Hmm.
I've seen while on psychedelics.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot there, but I just thought I'd mention it because it's like so recent.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned the half tab because one of my early experiences, I think the second time ever, which was on mushrooms, maybe a year or so after the first time, second or third time. I get the timeline a little mixed up here because I took a very small amount with my friend in Seattle, and he, after a couple hours of walking around, decided that nothing was happening. It sucks. I'm not feeling anything. I'm gonna go to bed. And so okay, I'm gonna keep walking around out here a
Yeah.
bit. And I remember looking in uh into the trees at night, and it was really foggy out, and there were the street lamps with the big cones of light in the fog. It was
Hmm.
really magical. And while looking at the branches, seeing my eyes, like everything went very foggy, as if I was unfocused and sort of scanning, but I felt like something was coming, and then suddenly everything popped into very intense detail. I could see
Hmm.
all the contours and lines, just very vivid imagery, which I
Hmm.
thought was beautiful. Um,
Hmm.
I then was walking around the streets, and there were like plants all along the side of the roads, and I kept walking and then slowing down and stopping, and I'd start going and I'd stop, and then I'd be thinking, where am I going? Why do I need to go anywhere? I'm right here where I need to be. This is it. And looking at the plants, seeing them as conscious entities, each one an expression of existence, just there, just saying, I'm here, I exist, just feeling that in a very meaningful way. And so why this is interesting to me is that it was such a small dose, so much that my friend said he didn't experience anything at all. But to me, it was an opportunity to allow the experience to happen through attentiveness and patience, I was able to glean these really valuable insights. But it was a small dose that allowed me to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a larger dose would have bowled me over, and I might have missed some of the subtler details.
Yeah. Yeah, a smaller dose makes it a little bit more like a tool that you can use instead of like some people have described it as like a rocket that you're strapping yourself to.
Yeah.
But at least if it's smaller, you can kind of at least guide it a little bit
Yeah.
more.
And I think it's easier to retain things from it afterward, because I think if you have a large dose, well, your revelations might be drastic and immediate. The mental state that you're putting yourself into is so separate from the one you were just in and will about to be in, that it's harder to retain things across that barrier.
Yeah, and I think it also has something to do with the way language kind of breaks down at a certain point.
Yeah.
Like I remember the first time I did it, there was there's just like no way to even ask what's going on, and or even ask what's going on, let alone figure out what's going on and be able to like put it into words.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always had profound difficulty trying to speak and communicate well on psychedelics.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of puts you in a state that's like pre-language, kind of going back to the baby metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of gets to that layer that's underneath.
Yeah, it's immediate. It's seeing what is really there, because you don't have the language structure to contextualize it and justify it and put it in a box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because language kind of divides things by nature.
It does.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot, but I forget if this is actually Terrence McKenna, but it's definitely a lyric on that Contortionist album. The idea that we are the language,
ever flowing, ever echoing.
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
That was one thing that didn't come so clearly to me immediately. That was like the one concept in that whole album that I didn't totally just like, oh, I get exactly what they mean. Which is cool because it's like the titular concept of that album, Language by the Contortionist. So to me, I sort of came to understand that as referring to Terrence McKenna's concept of how language is an abstraction from the truth, where no exact word means the thing that you're trying to say exactly. You just sort of find something that approximates it, and somehow we magically can understand each other.
Yeah.
Despite that, but then to extend that to say that's all there is. All of existence is just abstractions from the perfect truth.
Yeah, like you can like if you have a table in front of you, and you ask yourself what the table actually is, keep saying the sounds with your mouth, table, but and you can like describe the parts of the table, but those are just more sounds that you're making. You can't actually describe whatever it is that's underneath. And I have to admit, like I've heard people talk about that a lot, and I accept that it's true, but part of me still has a little bit of a problem with it, because you can explain like the parts and how they all fit together and what its purpose is, and uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that kind of does a job of explaining what a table is. I mean, it's still using words, but it's pretty darn close to describing what it is.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Pretty darn close.
Yeah.
And like somehow we have this way of looking at something that's pretty darn close and understanding that what it's actually referring to is the thing that it's pretty darn close to, rather than the 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 jumble of words that it actually is.
Right. Right.
Which I don't understand how that works, but it apparently works.
Yeah.
Sometimes, anyway.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Terrence McKenna also said that language is a double-edged sword,
Mm.
and I always come back to this analogy he gives of going to the jungle, and when you get there, it's just all green. It's all this one color. It's just this one, massive things that you can't distinguish. And if you go there with a guide, they'll point out the different plants to you, and you'll start to be able to distinguish those with names and language, and then you'll also be able to visually see the different colors of green and realize that there's lots of different distinctions you can make with language that help you see things more richly and in more detail.
Mm.
So it divides things, but it also can help you see things in a more complex and nuanced way.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I guess part of that is not taking yourself too seriously, or rather not taking the meaning of any sentence or word too literally.
Yeah, or getting caught up in like semantic stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that story you mentioned about your friend with the small dose of mushrooms, that reminds me of the only time I've done shrooms with which was with our mutual friend Alex White from CU.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I was back in Boulder visiting my mom, and it was like Christmas time or whatever, and we we got a hotel room because we didn't want to be at our parents' place. So we were just like hanging out, and we went for like a walk outside and listen to music and stuff, and that was the first time a piece of music ever made me cry, just from the pure beauty of it, not because I had some like nostalgic or romantic association with it. And
which piece of music?
It was Bon Iver's 22 A Million. We had listened through the whole album, and then the last track was the one that kind of did me in. And a really funny thing was I was actually mishearing the lyrics, because the actual lyrics are, I think it's it hurts me, it hurts me, it hurts me. I'll let it in. But what I heard was it haunts me, it haunts me, it haunts me. And the way I thought about that was just like the profound beauty of the universe, kind of, and the fact that it's there, and just that it's so beautiful. It's haunting.
Wow.
And yeah. And there's been one other time since then that wasn't under the influence of anything. It was during I think maybe I mentioned this at some point, but during Bernstein's Mass, when that got performed here. And there were just like so many people on stage, and it was just like complete chaos. It's like can't believe one person thought this up.
Yeah. As an aside, I'm curious, when you say you cried to the music, was it like tearing up a bit, or was it like tears streaming down your face?
It was like sobbing. I mean, it wasn't, it's not the hardest I've ever cried, but it wasn't just like, I'm just like, my face is just, still, and there's tears.
Yeah.
And I let myself do it because it's, I didn't like hold back because that's
Yeah.
kind of the point. It's just to let it happen. But
Wow.
yeah,
That's beautiful. I really respect you to be able to let that out.
yeah, I'm really curious what the next decade or so is going to hold for psychedelics. I mean, they're already being semi legalized in like Oakland, at least mushrooms, and they're kind of regaining. They're losing some of the stigma that they had.
Yeah, it's a slow and treacherous progress coming back from that.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's started to be, I think, a lot more openness towards them in public opinion as well as in academic and literary settings.
yeah, yeah, and in a lot of like tech companies, there's microdosing.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
um, I've heard mixed accounts of people using microdosing. I've definitely heard firsthand accounts of people who said it's a really good experience that has enriched their lives and helped them through emotions and to appreciate life more. I've also heard accounts of people who it what made them feel, or I've heard at least one account where someone said that they were starting to lose touch with reality and starting to go a little bit manic, so that they had to stop.
Huh.
I think an important thing to recognize if you're considering doing microdosing is that if you are having a recognizable psychedelic experience, you're not microdosing.
Yeah, yeah,
The point is to do so small amount that you can't perceive directly that you're doing it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's supposed to be like a tenth to a 20th of, or I guess a 20th to the 10th of a dose, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I also want to get like how if people do it regularly, how do they not just build up tolerance like really quickly?
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess
I don't know the physics of that.
change the dosage.
I've been thinking about trying microdosing. So where I am right now with psychedelic use, it's been a very profound and meaningful part of my growth as a person, and I think that there could still be more I could learn from doing or gain or grow from doing it again. But I haven't done it for years, and I don't intend to do it anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because after the last couple times, I had the experience of unraveling and of taking on damage beyond what the experience gained for me.
Huh. I don't know if you wanted to go into more detail about that. You don't have to. But
I mean, I'm happy to.
okay.
So while I feel like every single experience I've had, even the bad trips, has been a valuable experience and one that I can learn and grow from, there's always a cost to me, and I think to a lot of people, although it may take a while to catch up with you, because the way, as I understand it, the drugs work is they sort of attack the prefrontal cortex and break down existing structures, so then you can get these experiences of profound connection with the universe and all that, and seeing the fundamental nature of things as being all interconnected. But at the same time, it is taking damage to your brain, and your brain is highly resilient and can grow and heal itself afterward, and so that can be a really good thing. But you are taking damage, and that can add up. I've felt so after the last time I took psychedelics, it felt like I was for months and months in this sort of slowed down state where it was extra hard for me to communicate with people, to understand what they meant quickly, because sure, I was having like a full understanding, I think on a deeper level than the people were attempting to communicate, but at the same time, it sort of felt like I was a little bit underwater. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. I mean, I kind of have that. Maybe anyway. I don't really know if it started after I started taking psychedelics, but pretty much anything anyone says, you can interpret it in at least two different ways, and my brain is immediately like, okay, which one is it? You're bad at this. It's probably the one you're not thinking of, you know.
That's so stressful.
Maybe not, as self-flagellatory as you're bad at this, but yeah, it might not be your first instinct, and then you're like, oh wait, shit.
Yeah, that indecision, and then your mind goes into hyperdrive trying to work it out.
Yeah, I'm already like a pretty indecisive person.
And then even beyond that, going back to the time before that when I did 2 tabs of acid, that was the same as your first experience, the same occurrence. And for me, that experience left me for several months afterward scattered. My memory was very poor. I kept forgetting things, and I lost my longboard because I went to do my homework, and I got a sandwich, and I sat under a tree, and I did the homework and ate my sandwich, and then I walked away. So very absent-minded, forgetful, slightly manic, and that lasted for months before it was able to knit itself back together into my cohesiveness.
Yeah, no, I have definitely noticed that in the last few weeks or so, just being a little bit more scatterbrained. Could probably also chalk that up to having smoked weed daily for
that will also do
a while,
that.
But yeah, I don't know how. I mean, it's like 2.5 months ago, but.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it lasts many months, if not longer. And it feels like each successive time I've done it lately, well, not even lately, but the last couple times I did it, I felt like the damage got greater, while the experience didn't necessarily give me more than the first time.
If you were to do microdosing, what would be your goal?
I don't know that I would do microdosing. I think what I would actually do is just a very small dose, maybe a quarter of a tab or equivalent in mushroom. I would like to have vividness of experience that kind of experience can lend, of seeing the contours of the world and the shapes and the colors as being vivid realities.
So I guess one thing we haven't really touched on is the idea of ego death.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I I think I may have had something like that the first time I did acid, although I wasn't in a place to know what it was, or but There was a moment where I got turned around from the group we were in, and I was just trying to talk to this group of strangers. And I was asking them, "Who am I? Who am I?"
Wow.
Which, close call, because they could have just been like, let's call the cops on this crazy person. But I don't think y'all were actually too far from me. So.
Yeah, I don't remember that happening.
Yeah. I remember I asked Aiden about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I saw you talking to those people." I was like, "Thanks, dude." It's like that was good. So I don't know if that was a similar thing, but
Mm.
yeah. But the last time I did it, which was just I guess like a week and a half ago. I yeah, I had this moment of looking in the mirror and and just trying to concentrate on sense of information exclusively, and to go and try to go into kind of a meditative state. And I think I might have gotten there.
Mm.
I'm not entirely sure, but it did seem like everything just kind of merged, and it was just experience.
Mm. Yeah, so it's interesting that the psychedelic experience lends that form of experience where you don't see the barriers between things, and so you do see the way that they are connected.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that brought me to the realization that my body is nothing less than the entire universe as seen
Mm-hmm.
from this particular point in the universe.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that sensation?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's something I've had. Yeah, not on psychedelics, just like meditating. I remember we butted heads on that a little bit
Uh-huh.
when you first were telling me about that.
I do remember that.
It's cool. And I was like, okay, if you're the entire universe, like have that guy over there, do something, do something.
Uh-huh.
And um, well, I mean, part of what goes along with that. I mean, if you think that free will is an illusion, then like you can't even do that with your own body, really. Like there's nothing that and uh,
And I'm
and
still at odds on that point about
yeah,
that language of free
yeah,
will, but
right. But yeah, but as I learned more about that kind of thinking, uh, I think it's one of those kind of Zen paradoxes where uh, either none of it is you or all of it is you, and they're both kind of true at the same time. You know,
yeah, sure.
like yeah, like yourself doesn't exist, and or the whole thing is just you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I always think of like if you just imagine this wall with like eyes peeking out from it. It's basically that, but there's just like a body shape instead of it just being flat.
Wait, what is that?
It's just kind of the mental image I get
Huh.
if I get into that place. Like I don't know, like somehow I picture like this uh, like tubular structure, like the inside of a blood vessel or something. I don't know why,
Hmm.
but and there's like these two eyes kind of looking out down. Maybe it's kind of like an Alex Gray influenced kind of thing. I don't know. He's the
Alex.
artist who did the artwork for a lot of Tool's albums.
Okay.
You've probably seen
Yeah, definitely.
them without knowing what it is, but yeah, and that yeah, it's just these eyes kind of peering out of this just larger structure, and just kind of fixed and not able to move around, and yeah, which might be influenced a little bit by Douglas Harding's idea of headlessness,
Hmm.
which I think maybe
Yeah, we talked about that in the last
we talked about that.
episode.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's your experience of ego death. That's how you
yeah,
imagine it.
yeah.
It's funny you should put it that way. I've had an experience looking in a mirror, which, by the way, um, looking in a mirror has been a source of touching back on some of the same realizations I've had on psychedelics, where I'll have an experience of seeing myself, and and that ties directly back into, as you were talking about in our last episode, the idea that consciousness is something seeing itself seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had an experience looking in a mirror and seeing myself, and not just my body, or not just my body, but seeing my consciousness, seeing myself. And at that moment, that was all that I could see, and my body began to fade away, to the point where physically what I was seeing in the mirror was, strangely enough, my eyes and my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could see the flesh tone in that, around that area, but nothing else existed. And so that flesh tone became extrapolated outward. So it was like I was looking at a wall of flesh with my eyes in it.
That's kind of, yeah, that's the image.
It's interesting because I think it sounds like a lot of the things we're talking about, we have something touching on the same kind of experience, and yet our interpretations of them seem to be sometimes polar opposites.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, which connects almost exactly with that Alan Watts essay we talked about a few episodes back.
Yeah. Where he's talking about experiences of cosmic consciousness.
Yeah.
And how different people can look at that same experience, and one person says, I was huge, I was the entire universe, and someone else can say, I was nothing, I was no one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I think speaks to our language's inability to actually capture what's happening.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't really map onto the structures that we would try to fit to it.
Mm-hmm. We can then use impressionism to communicate.
What do you mean by that?
Just like abstract notions that represent what we're perceiving, or abstract forms that represent what we're perceiving. And so when someone looks at that form, they can have a sense of what we are and what we're trying to communicate by presenting that.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than delineating like a logical pattern for someone to follow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but better than saying nothing at all.
Although silence has its own place.
Yeah, that's true.
Which it goes back to, do you remember Dan Kellogg, our composition professor, would sometimes say about how his composition professor would break music down into two categories: German music and French music.
Yeah.
Where German music was like functional harmony and very logical progression. One thing leads to another, that's why it's there. And French music is notes, colors everywhere, just vague impressions.
Yeah, German music also being like counterpoint and that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Very structured.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you can go listen to a prelude by Debussy on the piano and totally get what he means, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's no direct logic to it, it's all just shapes.
Mm-hmm. I will say one thing about my last trip that was pretty unique. was I went into it with kind of the goal of curbing some of the addiction stuff I was talking about
Hmm.
in the uh, specifically around like the internet porn stuff, and I have to say it's been like pretty successful.
Wow,
Um,
that's fascinating.
yeah,
Congrats.
yeah, I've just kind of yeah examining that. I like was doing some art, like just writing some stuff, and
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, like for a long time I've you just read so much stuff about oh yeah, life's about more than just like hedonism, and like it's about like accomplishing things, and and you know uh and doing hard things, and hard work and all that stuff, and kind of like we talked in our motivation episode, it's hard to tease that apart from uh kind of the BS part of it of just keep accomplishing things,
Yeah.
um uh but kind of what that trip pushed me toward is creating beauty, and like expanding human knowledge is like the and caring for people, and just putting more love into the world is like that's what it's all about. And like I already believe that at some level, but uh it pushed me more away from
Hmm.
the hedonistic side of things.
Fascinating. I'm noticing a theme here with our experiences. That's the third one we've mentioned already, at least, where the the profound revelations that we had were things that we were thinking about before we did the psychedelics, and the psychedelics only served to show that that's really the truth rather than just being an idea that you're toying with.
Yeah, yeah, and I've heard, especially for people who are using these for therapeutic uses, that uh, it's often really helpful to kind of go in with a a question at least, or some kind of motive to focus on, and at the same time be ready to just not have that be
Mm-hmm.
a a component of it, or don't tie yourself to that being all you have to think about, or something that like has to be answered. But yeah, you just have to, if you can guide it a little bit, uh, it can go a long way.
Mm.
So it's interesting. A lot of people will caution that oh, acid will permanently change your brain chemistry, or like psychedelics will permanently change your brain chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
which I think there's some truth to. But I mean, the common retort is everything changes your brain chemistry permanently, or everything changes your brain chemistry at
Yeah.
least. um, uh, but I think both of us can attest to like there's only like before and after, and it's hard to go back to before at all. you know,
Yeah,
um, especially
definitely.
as more time passes.
Mm-hmm. It's just entirely. I wanted to say revolutionary. That's one of the things that's so challenging about this is to talk about psychedelics. It's such a huge thing, and a huge part of one's experience, of my experience, where there's so many facets to it that the as much as you talk about it, there's always so much more that's quintessential to the experience, but that you just didn't have time to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, when it lasts for so long, and you can have so many thoughts, and just go through so many different kind of
Mm.
revelations about things, um, and at the same time, like a lot of the things can sound kind of like platitudes, or just kind of generic statements to people,
Yeah.
and 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 that you that you feel them profoundly, and that they had such an impact on you, but it's really hard to express that in the right way sometimes.
Yeah. It's the shortcomings of words again.
Yeah, yeah.
after the first time I did acid, when I wrote down that account, which is, it's an essay-sized account that goes pretty in depth about a lot of ideas that were so important to me at that time. But for the next several years, that experience was so much on my mind that I was just trying to integrate that into my life, into my understanding of myself and my existence. It took years to bring in all of the elements, and there were just so many more things that I didn't write down that first time that, it would be a year later and I'd remember something huge and say, oh, that was so quintessentially that experience and so important and relevant. And it's taken me this long to even remember that it happened in order to integrate it into my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's something I don't know about you, but like you kind of think about it every day in relation to something.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
At the same time, like, I mean, not that you can't get addicted to them, but it's different than kind of like an addictive compulsory way. Like,
yeah, you don't feel compelled to do it again right off the bat. You or at least for me, I want months, if not years, in between each time I do it, in order to allow that time for it to sink in, to integrate the experience.
Yeah, I think it's a little different for me, but
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own tempos. That's something that we should probably mention. So kids,
we do not endorse nor encourage the use of any illicit drugs or
yeah, what he said,
or mind-altering substances. And this is purely for harm reduction. And
yeah, all that, and also psychedelics hit people different ways. Some people are so much more susceptible to the effects and to the side effects that it is possible to permanently fuck yourself up by doing drugs. I've met people who, I knew a guy who did acid one time, a normal dose, and when I met him, he was zonked out. He was spaced out, and he told me, he confessed that it was that time doing acid, and from that point on, he's constantly seeing everything in fractals, and it just makes it so hard for him to relate and to live his life and to communicate.
Damn.
So like you can fuck yourself up with this, and unless you are absolutely sure of yourself that it is a thing that you want to do and a risk that you want to accept, then I would discourage you from using psychedelics.
Yeah, and if you have you have certain mental disorders that can be exacerbated by it, like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, then it's proceed with caution.
Yeah, there's always so much more that I want to talk about, and maybe there's room here for a part 2 and maybe a part 5.